My name is Edna, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing on my own front porch with a key that wouldn't work. The lock had been changed. After 42 years in this house, someone had locked me out of my own home. Through the window, I could see my daughter-in-law, Sienna, watching me with those cold, calculating eyes. She expected me to break down to beg to cry, but what she didn't know was that I had one ace up my sleeve. Before I tell you how one phone call changed everything, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. Let me take you back to 1981, when my late husband Harold and I first walked through the front door of this little two-story colonial. We were young newlyweds, barely making ends meet, but head over heels in love with a house we could barely afford. Harold worked grueling double shifts at the steel mill, while I took in sewing from neighbors to help scrape together our monthly mortgage payments. Every spare penny went into transforming this empty shell into something we could call home. I can still remember the excitement we felt painting those kitchen walls. Sunshine yellow, because Harold said the color reminded him of my smile on our wedding day. We spent entire weekends planting rose bushes along the front walkway, their thorns pricking our fingers as we carefully arranged them in perfect rows. The white picket fence took us 3 months to build, working only on Harold's days off. But we were so proud when we finally hammered in that last board. When our son Marcus came along in 1983, this house transformed from a home into the center of our entire universe. Harold would chase our giggling toddler around the backyard for hours, while I watched from the kitchen window, my hands covered in flour from baking chocolate chip cookies that filled the whole house with warmth and sweetness. Those golden afternoons felt like they would last forever. We hosted every birthday celebration, every holiday gathering, every milestone moment within these walls. When Marcus graduated high school, we threw a party that spilled out into the backyard with all his friends and their families. When Harold passed away from a sudden heart attack in 2019, I thought my world had completely crumbled. But somehow, I managed to pay off the remaining mortgage balance with his life insurance money. This house became mine, free and clear, filled with every precious memory of our beautiful life together. Marcus had always been my greatest pride and joy. He graduated college with honors, earning a business degree that landed him a solid position at Northwestern Insurance Company downtown. For years after Harold's death, it was just the two of us, maintaining our family traditions with weekly Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations that kept Harold's memory alive in these rooms, where he had been so happy. Marcus was a devoted son, calling me every few days just to check in, and spending his weekends helping me with yard work and minor repairs around the house. He never made me feel like a burden, never suggested I was getting too old to manage on my own. Then Sienna entered our lives like a storm we never saw coming. Marcus met her at a business conference in 2018. She was 35, then tall and striking, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of whatever room she entered. From our very first meeting, something deep in my gut told me to be cautious. While Marcus talked endlessly about her intelligence and professional ambition, I couldn't help but notice how her gaze lingered on our family photographs, asking seemingly innocent questions about the house's current market value and Harold's pension benefits. Their courtship moved at breakneck speed. Within 6 months of that first meeting, they were engaged and planning what Marcus called the wedding of Sienna's dreams. The ceremony in 2020 was undeniably beautiful. I'll give her credit for that. But during the reception, I overheard Sienna speaking to one of her college friends about finally upgrading their living situation once they figured out how to handle the mother-in-law problem. My blood turned ice cold, but I convinced myself I must have misunderstood her words. The changes in my relationship with Marcus started so gradually that I almost didn't notice them at first. Sienna would make seemingly caring comments about how unsafe it must be for an elderly woman to live alone in such a large house with so many stairs and potential hazards. She'd casually mention retirement communities she'd researched that offered people my own age and organized activities designed specifically for seniors who needed more social interaction. Initially, Marcus would defend me firmly, insisting that I was perfectly capable of caring for myself and managing my own affairs. But as the months passed, those defenses became weaker and less frequent. I began noticing hushed phone conversations that would stop abruptly whenever I entered the room. Marcus started visiting less often, and when he did come by, Sienna was always attached to his side, steering every conversation toward my future care needs and safety concerns. During their visits, Sienna would walk through my home like she was already measuring spaces for new furniture, commenting on how much square footage was being wasted on just one person. She'd point out areas that could be better utilized and suggest modifications that would make the house more suitable for a young couple starting their family. I started catching her taking photographs of different rooms with her phone, claiming she wanted to document the beautiful decorating choices I'd made over the years. But something about the way she framed those shots made me suspicious that she was actually appraising the property value rather than admiring my interior design. The most troubling change was in Marcus himself. My confident, articulate son began seeming confused and forgetful during our conversations. He'd start sentences and then trail off looking lost. His hands developed a slight tremor that he tried to hide by keeping them in his pockets. When I asked if he was feeling all right, he'd blame work stress and mention that Sienna had found him a doctor who prescribed anxiety medication to help him cope. The devastating attack came on what had started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in early September. I followed my usual weekly routine, driving to Miller's grocery store for my regular shopping trip, just like I had done every Tuesday for decades without fail. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down waved cheerfully to me from her flower garden, and dear old Mr. Jenkins helped me load my grocery bags into the car with his usual gentlemanly courtesy. Everything seemed completely normal and peaceful. But the moment I turned onto Maple Street and saw my house, an overwhelming sense of dread settled deep in my stomach. There was a silver sedan parked in my driveway that I didn't recognize taking up the space where I always parked my own car. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't yet imagine how wrong. I pulled up to the curb and walked slowly toward my front door, grocery bags weighing heavy in my arms, my heart already beginning to race with inexplicable anxiety. When I inserted my key into the lock and tried to turn it, nothing happened. The key wouldn't budge even a fraction of an inch. I tried again, thinking perhaps my arthritis was making my hands less steady than usual. Still, nothing. Someone had changed the locks on my own front door. My hands began shaking uncontrollably as I knocked on what was supposed to be my own front door, feeling like a stranger, begging for entry into my own home. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, the door swung open to reveal Sienna standing in my doorway. But this wasn't the polite, artificially sweet smile she usually wore during family gatherings. This was a cold, triumphant smirk that made my blood freeze in my veins and sent chills racing down my spine. Her green eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "This isn't your house anymore, Edna," she announced, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "You need to find somewhere else to go. We've moved on without you." Behind her, I could see Marcus standing motionless in my living room, the room where Harold and I had watched countless movies together. My son, my only child, wouldn't even lift his eyes to meet mine. His hands were trembling violently, and his face had turned pale as fresh snow. When our eyes finally met, for just a brief moment, I saw something I had never seen in my son's face before. A mixture of shame, fear, and complete helplessness. "Chung? Marcus!" I called out, fighting to keep my voice steadier than my racing heart felt. "What is this? What's going on here?" Sienna stepped forward deliberately, positioning herself to block my view of my son. She held up a manila folder stuffed with official-looking documents that rustled importantly in her grasp. "Marcus signed the house over to me last month. Everything's completely legal and binding. You have absolutely no claim to this property anymore." The words hit me like a physical punch to my stomach, knocking the breath from my lungs. "That's completely impossible. This house is in my name only. Harold's will left it specifically to me." "Was in your name?" Sienna corrected with a smile, so cruel it made my skin crawl. "Marcus is my husband now, not your little boy, who needs Mommy's permission for everything. We've been planning this transition for months. He finally realized it was time to think about his own future, instead of being tied down by an aging mother who can't take proper care of herself." Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I looked desperately past Sienna to Marcus, searching his face for any sign that this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could be easily explained away. "Marcus, please, look at me, son. Is this really what you want? Is this really your decision?" For one heartbreaking moment, my son raised his head, and our eyes met directly. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with tears that threatened to spill over. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to speak, formed the beginning of a word, then closed it again and looked away toward the floor. That silence, that refusal to defend me or explain what was happening, broke my heart more completely than any words could have. I became aware that neighbors had started noticing the commotion unfolding on my front porch. Mrs. Chen, from the house next door, was peeking through her lace curtains, and I could see Mr. Rodriguez across the street, pretending to water his already perfectly green lawn, while obviously straining to hear every word of our conversation. The public humiliation burned almost as intensely as the personal betrayal. Sienna seemed to be feeding off my visible pain and confusion. We've already contacted several nursing facilities in the area that have immediate availability. There are some very nice places with people your own age who can relate to your situation. You'll be much happier there, and Marcus and I can finally start our real lives together without constantly worrying about your declining mental state. Standing on that familiar porch, where Harold and I had welcomed so many friends over the years, looking at my son's defeated posture and my daughter-in-law's victorious sneer, I felt something fundamental shift deep inside my chest. Yes, I was hurt beyond anything I had ever experienced. Yes, I was shocked by the cruelty and calculated nature of this betrayal. But underneath all that crushing pain, a flame of pure determination began to burn, brighter than my grief. I thought about Harold and how he had always insisted I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. I remembered all the years I had worked multiple jobs to help build this life, to create this home, to raise the man who now couldn't even look me in the eye. And I realized that if Sienna thought she could destroy my family with lies and manipulation, she was about to discover exactly what kind of woman she was really dealing with. Instead of the tears and desperate pleading she was so obviously expecting, I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and looked her directly in those cold green eyes. You know what, Sienna? You're absolutely right about everything. I am getting older, and maybe I do need to start thinking about my future very differently than I have been. Her smug expression wavered slightly, as if she had been mentally prepared for a much bigger fight, and my calm response was throwing off her script. I'll need some time to make proper arrangements for such a big transition, I continued in the most reasonable voice I could manage. But please don't worry about me being difficult about this. I'll be completely out of your way very soon. I turned around and walked back to my car with as much dignity as I could possibly muster, deliberately leaving my grocery bags sitting on the porch like an offering. As I drove away from the house where I had lived my entire adult life, I could see Sienna in my rear-view mirror, standing in the doorway of what had been my home, with a puzzled expression replacing her earlier confidence. She had been expecting tears and desperate pleading, and threats to call lawyers. Instead, I had given her calm, rational acceptance of her victory. What she had absolutely no way of knowing was that I was already 3 steps ahead of her and planning my counterattack. I drove straight to Patricia Holloway's law office on Main Street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Patricia and I had been close friends since our high school days, and she had handled all of Harold's estate planning after his passing. If anyone in this town would know how to legally untangle this nightmare, it would be Patricia. Patricia took one look at my face when I walked through her office door and immediately cleared her afternoon calendar. "Edna, dear, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost walking around in broad daylight." I told her everything that had just happened. The changed locks, Sienna's claims about Marcus, signing over the house, the cruel and dismissive way she had ejected me from my own home, like I was a piece of unwanted furniture. As I spoke, Patricia's expression grew progressively darker and more concerned. "Edna," she said with absolute firmness, when I finished my story, "what they did today is completely illegal under state property law. The house is in your name only, according to Harold's will and the county records. Marcus has absolutely no legal right to sign anything regarding that property, regardless of what Sienna told him." Relief flooded through my entire body like cool water on a burning day. But Patricia's expression told me she wasn't finished delivering important information. "Actually, I've been waiting for this phone call," she continued, pulling out a thick manila file from her desk drawer that looked like it contained substantial documentation. "I have something that's going to shock you, but it explains everything that's been happening." She opened the file and spread several official-looking documents across her desk in organized rows. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to access Harold's estate records from the county courthouse. When unusual activity like that occurs on a closed and settled estate, they automatically notify the executor, which happens to be me. My heart started racing with anticipation and dread. What kind of unusual activity are we talking about? Someone was systematically trying to find legal loopholes in Harold's will that might give Marcus any possible claim to the house. When that research turned up empty, they moved on to attempting to access your personal financial records at First National Bank. Patricia pulled out another set of papers that looked like official reports. This is where the story gets really interesting and really disturbing. The person making all these inquiries wasn't your son Marcus. It was someone using the name Sienna Walsh, but also going by Sienna Walsh Mitchell and Sienna Walsh Rodriguez. I don't understand what that means. It means your daughter-in-law has been married before Edna, twice, and both of those previous marriages ended with her former husbands mysteriously signing over significant assets to her. Just before filing for divorce, Patricia's voice carried the grim tone of someone delivering very bad news. Sienna has a clear pattern of behavior. She systematically targets older men with substantial assets, marries them quickly, isolates them from their support systems, and manipulates them into signing over everything they own. The small office seemed to be spinning around me. Are you telling me that Marcus is being deliberately manipulated, and my son is just another victim in some kind of long-term scheme? I'm telling you that Marcus is her third known victim, and possibly not her last. Patricia pulled out what appeared to be a police report with official letterhead. Her second husband, David Rodriguez, actually filed criminal charges against her in 2017 for identity theft and financial manipulation. But he eventually dropped all the charges after she threatened to expose some embarrassing information about his business dealings that could have destroyed his career. Patricia leaned forward across her desk, her expression deadly serious. There's much more to this story, Edna. After the courthouse incident raised red flags, I hired a private investigator to look into Sienna's recent activities. We've been quietly watching her for 3 weeks now, and what we've discovered is absolutely criminal. She handed me a thick manila envelope that felt heavy with damning evidence. These are photographs from the bank's security cameras taken over the past month. Look at these carefully. I pulled out a series of black and white photographs that showed Sienna at various bank counters, apparently conducting business with different tellers. There she was, bold as brass, standing at First National Bank, trying to access accounts that didn't belong to her. She's been systematically forging your signature on bank documents, attempting to add herself as a beneficiary to your savings accounts and your certificate of deposit. She's also been trying to access your safe deposit box and attempting to withdraw substantial amounts of money using fake identification. Patricia pointed to specific photos. The bank tellers became suspicious because her forged signatures didn't match their records of your actual signature. Instead of confronting her directly, they've been stalling her requests and documenting every attempt. We now have enough evidence to send her to prison for 20 years on fraud charges alone. My head was reeling with this information. But what about Marcus? If he doesn't actually own the house, how could he sign it over to anyone? He couldn't, and he didn't sign anything legally binding. Patricia's smile was grim but satisfied. Whatever document Sienna showed you today was a complete forgery, probably created on her computer. Marcus doesn't have any legal authority to sign over property that belongs entirely to you. But here's the strategic problem we face. We need to catch her in the act of active fraud, not just attempted fraud. Patricia leaned back in her leather chair, clearly working through a complex plan. I have a strategy that will give us everything we need to put her away permanently, but it's going to require some acting on your part. Are you prepared to do whatever it takes? My mind was still racing to process everything I had learned, but that flame of determination burned brighter than ever. Tell me exactly what you need me to do. We're going to let Sienna believe she's completely won this battle. Tomorrow, you're going to return to that house looking humble and defeated. You're going to beg her to let you stay temporarily. Offer to sign over your remaining assets to Marcus for management purposes. Whatever it takes to make her feel completely comfortable and in total control. Patricia pulled out a small electronic recording device that looked surprisingly sophisticated. You'll be wearing this hidden recorder. We need her to admit everything on tape, exactly what she's done and precisely how she accomplished it. People like Sienna have massive egos and can't resist bragging about their victories when they think they're safe. Once we have her full confession recorded, we can coordinate with the police and district attorney to make arrests. I took the recording device surprised by how lightweight it felt, considering how much it would weigh in the scales of justice. There's one more thing you need to know, Patricia said gently. Our investigation suggests that Marcus isn't entirely innocent in this situation, but he's also not entirely guilty either. We found evidence that Sienna has been systematically drugging him with prescription anxiety medication to make him more compliant and easier to manipulate. We discovered she's been crushing benzodiazepines into his food for months. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place like a puzzle solving itself. Marcus's recent behavioral changes, His inability to look me in the eye, his trembling hands, his confusion and forgetfulness. He wasn't just feeling guilty about betraying his mother. He was being chemically controlled without his knowledge. "So we're not just fighting to save my house," I said quietly, understanding the full scope of what we were really dealing with. "We're fighting to save my son's life and sanity." Patricia nodded solemnly. "Now let's talk about exactly how we're going to accomplish both of those goals." Yeah. The next morning, I sat in my car outside the house where I had lived my entire adult life, spending 10 long minutes gathering my courage and mentally rehearsing the performance that Patricia and I had carefully planned the night before. The recording device felt strange and unfamiliar, taped against my chest, but I knew it represented my lifeline to justice and my son's salvation. I approached my own front door and knocked softly, deliberately, adopting what I hoped appeared to be a defeated and submissive posture. When Sienna opened the door, I was ready to deliver the performance of my lifetime. "Sienna, please," I began, allowing my voice to shake convincingly with what I hoped sounded like genuine fear and desperation. "I spent the entire night thinking about everything you said yesterday, and I think maybe you're absolutely right about everything. Maybe I really am too old and confused to live alone safely." Her green eyes narrowed with suspicion, but I could clearly see interest and satisfaction there as well. "What exactly do you want from me, Edna?" "I want to make this situation right for everyone involved. I don't want to lose my relationship with my son over stubbornness and pride. If Marcus truly thinks it's best for me to move into a proper care facility, then maybe that's exactly what I should do." I paused dramatically, as if gathering courage to continue. "But I need help with all the complicated transition details. All of my financial accounts, my social security benefits, my insurance policies, everything is still in my name only. I don't understand how to handle these complex legal things anymore." Sienna's rigid posture relaxed noticeably. This was exactly the response she had been hoping to hear from me. I was really hoping. I continued carefully, making sure every word was being captured by the recording device. That maybe Marcus could help me transfer everything into his name properly, so he can take care of all these complicated financial matters for me. I trust him completely to make sure I'm provided for appropriately. The greedy gleam that flashed through Sienna's eyes was unmistakable and deeply disturbing. "Well, that certainly does sound like the most responsible approach to your situation. Please come inside. Marcus is in the kitchen finishing his breakfast." As I stepped across the threshold into what had been my sanctuary for over 4 decades, I felt a surge of anger at seeing how Sienna had already begun systematically rearranging and replacing my most precious belongings. My family photographs had been moved to less prominent locations to make room for her own possessions, and Harold's favorite reading chair had been pushed into a dark corner like discarded furniture. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table that Harold had built with his own hands, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. When he noticed me entering the room, he looked up with confused, frightened eyes that broke my heart. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I thought—" His voice trailed off like he couldn't remember what he had been thinking. "I came to apologize to both of you. I said, sitting down in the chair directly across from my son. Sienna was completely right yesterday. I've been selfish and unrealistic, holding on to this house when you two need to build your own independent life together, without an elderly mother interfering. Marcus looked back and forth between Sienna and me, with obvious confusion, clearly struggling to follow the logic of our conversation. Mom, I don't understand what's happening. Yesterday, you seemed so upset and angry. I was upset initially, I admitted, staying in character. But I had all night to think clearly about the situation. Sienna explained how you had finally realized it was time to move forward with your adult life. She told me about all the careful planning you two had been doing to ensure my future security. Sienna moved behind Marcus, placing her hands on his shoulders in what looked like a gesture of support, but felt more like ownership. Marcus has been extremely thoughtful about planning your future care, Edna. We both genuinely want what's best for your health and safety. I know you do, and I'm grateful, I said, looking directly into Sienna's calculating eyes. That's exactly why I'm here today. I want to make sure everything gets handled properly and legally. When Marcus signed the house over to you, how exactly did that process work? I want to understand the proper procedures for transferring the other assets. Sienna's eyes lit up with unmistakable excitement. She obviously couldn't resist the opportunity to demonstrate her cleverness and explain her successful scheme. It was actually surprisingly simple once we understood the legal framework, she said, her voice taking on that superior, condescending tone that I had grown to despise. Marcus has automatic power of attorney over all family assets as the only surviving male heir. The house transfer was simply a matter of filing the correct paperwork with the county. I felt the recording device working against my chest and knew I was getting exactly the kind of evidence that Patricia needed to build an airtight case. But I pressed forward carefully, wanting to make absolutely certain we captured every detail of her criminal confession. Power of attorney? I asked, feigning the confusion of an elderly woman who didn't understand legal terminology. When was that arrangement established? I don't remember signing anything like that. It was established last month, Sienna said confidently, clearly enjoying her opportunity to explain her superior understanding of legal matters. Right after Marcus finally acknowledged how significantly you were declining mentally. It's all completely legal and properly documented. Marcus looked up sharply with genuine surprise and confusion. I never signed any power of attorney papers, Sienna. You told me those documents were just updated insurance forms that needed my signature. Shush, honey, Sienna interrupted, squeezing his shoulders tightly in a way that looked painful. You're still confused from your medication. Remember what Dr. Patterson explained about how the anxiety pills might affect your short-term memory formation. Watching my son's face as he struggled to piece together memories through a haze of involuntary medication broke my heart. But I forced myself to stay focused on getting the evidence we needed. The important thing to remember, Sienna continued addressing me while maintaining her grip on Marcus, is that everything has been handled through proper legal channels. Your precious son finally understands that he has to choose between his future success and his unhealthy attachment to his past. The cruelty in her voice was becoming more apparent and vicious as she felt more secure in what she believed was her complete victory. You know what the most beautiful part of this whole situation is? Sienna continued, apparently unable to stop herself from bragging about her manipulation. Marcus signed every single document I put in front of him without even bothering to read the details. He trusted me so completely and blindly that he would rather take pills and drift through life than face adult reality. Sienna, please stop. Marcus whispered weakly, but she completely ignored his plea. He's exactly like you, actually, she said to me with vicious satisfaction. Weak, sentimental, living in a fantasy world instead of embracing real life. But, unlike you, he's still useful to me, at least for the time being. I felt sick to my stomach, listening to her describe my son like he was a disposable tool. But I knew the recording device was capturing every cruel word. So the house legally belongs to you now? I asked, wanting absolute clarity for the recording. Completely and permanently. And by the end of this week, your bank accounts, your social security benefits, and your life insurance policies will also be under my control. Marcus has been wonderfully cooperative about signing whatever paperwork I've prepared for him. Even though he doesn't seem to remember signing most of these documents, Sienna laughed with genuine amusement, as if my question was naive and amusing. That's the absolute beauty of properly managed anxiety medication. It makes people so much more agreeable and compliant. Marcus used to ask endless annoying questions about every little detail. Now he just signs whatever I tell him to sign and takes his pills like an obedient child. Her confession was even more damning and comprehensive than Patricia had hoped we would capture. Sienna had just admitted to drugging Marcus without his knowledge and systematically forging legal documents, all while being clearly recorded. You're remarkably clever, I said, standing up slowly and preparing for the final phase of our plan. Harold always told me I wasn't intelligent enough to handle complicated legal and financial matters. I suppose he was completely right about my limitations. Harold was wrong about many things during his lifetime, Sienna said dismissively, but he was definitely accurate about that particular assessment. You're completely out of your depth in these situations, Edna. You should actually feel grateful that Marcus found someone intelligent and capable enough to handle your affairs properly. I moved toward the front door, then paused and turned back, as if suddenly remembering something important. Oh, there's one more detail I'm curious about. When you forged my signature on those bank documents, did you have to practice first? I've always been told that my signature is quite difficult to duplicate accurately. For just a moment, Sienna's face went pale as she realized what she had inadvertently revealed. But her arrogance and overconfidence overrode her caution. I'm a professional graphic designer with years of experience. Copying signatures is absolutely child's play for someone with my skills and training. Those bank tellers never suspected anything unusual. Actually, I said, allowing myself to smile genuinely, for the first time in days, they suspected quite a bit more than you realize. I pulled out my cell phone and speed-dialed Patricia's number. Within 30 seconds, I could hear police sirens approaching in the distance, growing louder every moment. Ashishi, what did you do? Sienna demanded, her voice rising to a panicked shriek as the reality of her situation began to dawn on her. I made one phone call, I said calmly, watching as 3 police cars pulled up outside the house where Harold and I had been so happy. Actually, I made several strategic phone calls. to my attorney, to the district attorney, and to the police department. They've all been very interested in your previous marriages, Sienna, especially David Rodriguez. He was quite eager to share his experiences with your methods once he learned you were targeting another family. Detective Morrison knocked firmly on the front door, and I opened it to let him enter. Behind him came Patricia, carrying a briefcase stuffed with all the evidence we had been carefully gathering for weeks. Sienna Walsh, Detective Morrison announced officially. You're under arrest for identity theft, signature, forgery, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. As he read Sienna her constitutional rights, she turned desperately to Marcus, trying one final manipulation. Tell them the truth. Tell them you wanted this arrangement. Tell them you signed everything willingly because you love me. But Marcus was staring at her with dawning horror and perfect clarity as the fog of involuntary medication began to lift from his mind. You've been drugging me systematically, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. All those pills you claimed were for my anxiety. You were deliberately keeping me confused and compliant. Marcus, honey, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. I understand everything perfectly now, Marcus said, rising from his chair with new determination. You made me into a victim, just like you were planning to make my mother a victim. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out the forged documents alongside the authentic originals for comparison. The handwriting analyst will find these signature comparisons very interesting, she told Detective Morrison. Our expert has already confirmed that all of Mrs. Chen's signatures on bank documents from the past month are obvious forgeries. As they led Sienna away in handcuffs, she screamed threats and accusations, but her words carried no power anymore. The truth had been revealed, recorded, and documented. Justice was finally being served after months of careful manipulation and criminal behavior. Marcus collapsed into Harold's old reading chair and buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking with a mixture of relief and shame. Mom, I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know how I allowed this to happen to our family. I don't know how I became so weak and stupid. I sat down in the chair next to my son and took his trembling hands in mine. You weren't weak or stupid, honey. You were deliberately victimized by someone who specialized in psychological manipulation. She preyed on your natural trust and your love for me. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human, and that makes you her victim. How did you know to record her confession? Your father used to say that people who build their lives on lies can't resist bragging about how clever they think they are. I figured if I gave Sienna enough rope and enough opportunity, she would hang herself with her own arrogance. Over the next several hours, Patricia explained the full scope of Sienna's criminal enterprise to Marcus. The systematically forged documents, the previous marriages, that had ended in financial devastation. The carefully planned scheme to steal our family's lifetime of accumulated assets. As the drugs worked their way out of his system, my son became increasingly horrified at the extent of what had been done to him. She showed me fake medical reports, claiming you were developing early-stage dementia, he said, through tears that had been building up for months. She had official-looking documents saying you weren't mentally competent to live alone anymore. She convinced me that if I didn't help her get legal control of your affairs, you'd end up homeless on the streets. And you believed her because you love me and wanted to protect me, I said softly. That wasn't a character flaw, Marcus. That's exactly what made you vulnerable to someone who understood how to exploit genuine love and concern. Hatted. 3 months later, the trial took place in Judge Harold Morrison's courtroom, which felt like a sign from my late husband that justice was finally being served. Sienna's defense attorney attempted to claim that she had been acting in Marcus's best interests and trying to ensure proper care for an elderly family member. But the evidence against her was overwhelming and undeniable. David Rodriguez flew in from California to testify about his own experiences with Sienna's systematic manipulation and financial fraud. Bank employees testified in detail about the forged signatures and repeated attempts to access accounts fraudulently. The pharmacist testified about the anxiety medications that Sienna had been obtaining under false pretenses and without proper prescriptions. But the most damaging evidence of all was her own recorded confession, played for the jury in her own voice, bragging about drugging Marcus and forging legal documents. When the prosecution played that audio recording of Sienna explaining her scheme in detail, the expressions of disgust and horror on the jurors' faces told the whole story. Marcus testified courageously about the months of confusion and mental fog, the gradual realization that his mind wasn't functioning properly, and the devastating discovery that he had been chemically manipulated by someone he trusted completely. His testimony was heartbreaking but powerful, and it clearly resonated with everyone in that courtroom. When Judge Morrison announced the verdict, guilty on all counts, I felt a tremendous weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for so long. Sienna received a sentence of 15 years in state prison. Her previous victims, including David Rodriguez, filed civil lawsuits to recover their stolen assets and received substantial financial settlements. Marcus and I sat together in the front row of that courtroom holding hands as justice was finally served and our nightmare officially ended. After the trial concluded, Marcus moved back home with me for several months while he recovered physically and emotionally from his ordeal. We spent that precious time rebuilding our relationship and reconstructing the trust that had been damaged by Sienna's manipulation. He attended counseling sessions twice a week to deal with the trauma of being drugged and psychologically controlled. I accompanied him to several sessions to better understand what he had endured and how I could support his recovery. We also spent time physically restoring our home together, working side by side to repair the damage that had been done. Marcus repainted the kitchen walls that same sunshine yellow that Harold and I had chosen 40 years earlier, and we worked together to replant the rose garden that had been neglected during those terrible months of uncertainty. Working with our hands and rebuilding something beautiful together helped heal both of our wounded hearts. Gradually and carefully, Marcus began dating again. This time, I met Sarah very early in their relationship, a kind, patient kindergarten teacher who genuinely loved hearing his stories about our family traditions and asked thoughtful, caring questions about his recovery process. When he brought her to Sunday dinner for the first time, she arrived with homemade apple pie and spent over an hour looking through our family photo albums with authentic interest and joy. Marcus proposed to Sarah in our backyard, under the oak tree that Harold had planted the year Marcus was born. When she said yes, through happy tears, the first thing she did was ask me if I would help her plan their wedding. That moment was when I knew my son had finally found someone who truly understood the importance of family and the value of the love we shared. Their wedding was intimate and beautiful, held in our backyard with Sarah's family and our closest friends celebrating together. During his speech as the groom, Marcus spoke movingly about learning the difference between genuine love and psychological manipulation, between healthy trust and dangerous gullibility. He thanked me publicly for never giving up on him, even when he couldn't trust his own judgment. As I watched them dance their first dance as husband and wife, under the same stars that Harold and I had danced under so many years before I thought about my late husband, and how incredibly proud he would have been to see our son find real, honest love after surviving such devastating betrayal. Now, 2 years later, Marcus and Sarah live in their own home just 10 minutes away from me. They come for Sunday dinner every single week without fail. And Sarah has started a wonderful tradition of bringing ingredients to cook together in my kitchen. Last month, she told me with glowing excitement that they're expecting their first child, and she asked if I would like to help decorate the nursery. Standing in my kitchen yesterday, watching my son and daughter-in-law making plans for their future, while surrounded by the love and memories that fill every corner of this house, I've learned something profoundly important about resilience and the power of family bonds. Home isn't just about 4 walls and a roof that shelter you from storms. It's about the love that lives within those walls, the memories that are created there, and the people who choose to protect and nurture that love through good times and difficult challenges. Sometimes you have to fight harder than you ever imagined possible to protect that love from people who want to destroy it for their own selfish gain. Sienna expected me to be a helpless old woman who would crumble under pressure and accept defeat gracefully. Instead, she discovered that you don't survive 42 years of marriage, raise a child through all of life's ups and downs, and build a meaningful life without developing some serious steel in your spine and fire in your heart. If someone ever tries to take what's rightfully yours, if someone attempts to manipulate or harm your family, remember this story and remember that the truth has a way of coming out eventually. When it does, make sure you're ready with more than just tears and pleading. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, trust your instincts, and make one strategic phone call to someone who believes in justice. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Protect your family with everything you have, and never underestimate the power of a woman who has lived long enough to know the difference between genuine love and calculated manipulation. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who tried to manipulate or harm your family? What would you have done if you found yourself in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. If this story resonated with you and reminded you of the importance of fighting for what's right, please give this video a like and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family resilience and justice. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know and that home is always worth fighting for. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And remember, family is worth protecting, and love is worth defending, no matter what your age or circumstances might be.